Modern Love, the podcast, is supported by...
Produced by the iLab at WBUR, Boston.
From the New York Times and WBUR Boston, this is Modern Love. Stories of love, loss, and redemption. I'm your host, Meghna Chakrabarty. Sometimes the thing we love most isn't a person. It could be a place that we return to over and over again at different times throughout our lives. Laura Dave writes about one of those places in her piece, GPS for My Lost Identity. It's read by Diane Guerrero. You can see her in Jane the Virgin and Orange is the New Black. She's also the author of a new book called My Family Divided.
Last summer, I found out that my identity had been stolen. It was the weekend of a friend's wedding, and I was standing outside the Memorial Church at Stanford University for the rehearsal when I called my bank to make sure I could clear an important check.
You may dial an extension at any time.
The bank associate told me that this would be impossible as my account was almost $10,000 overdrawn. She then asked me if I was calling from Mexico. I looked around at Stanford's sprawling green, students playing frisbee, tourists snapping photographs, and told the woman that I was fairly certain I wasn't. Laura Dave most recently called to inform us she was in Mexico, she replied. If you're not there, then who are you? My head started to hurt, and it would continue to hurt as the details emerged over the next few days. This person had acquired a debit card in my name and had used it to spend tens of thousands of dollars. In going over every debit charge, the bank associate asked me if I'd shopped at Victoria's Secret. Like, ever? I asked. Do you know what the meat barn is? She asked. No, I said. Did I want to know? Definitely not. Still, the gravity of the situation hadn't really sunk in. I thought it would all be taken care of with a few phone calls. Then, the first police detective I spoke with said, "Get ready, kid. Once someone gets a hold of your identity, you have to fight the good fight to get it back. This is just the beginning." Could he be right? I thought I was coming to the end of a period in which I had already fought the good fight. A period in which I had asked and answered many questions about my identity. Following a breakup the fall before, I had struggled to feel like myself again. During those first few months, the version of me that I'd recognize as being essentially generous and open to the world seemed to have temporarily disappeared. At warp speed, I'd gone from easygoing to confrontational. When a friend called in the middle of the night to tell me he was having trouble with his wife, I told him to look in the mirror and begin therapy. When another asked what I thought about her quitting a job she hated and moving to South America, I told her that when I believed she was serious about being that brave, we could have that conversation. Historically, I was the friend others sought out for relationship advice or to discuss a complicated family problem. I prided myself on being non-judgmental. But clearly, as I aimed to start over, that me was closed for business. I needed to return to my most independent self, which translated into not having much room for other people. I dived into work, dived into exercise, and avoided diving into relationships, romantic or otherwise, at all costs. And almost accidentally, I found myself straddling two lives. A new one I was starting in Los Angeles, and the one I had left in New York. A 4-day trip to Southern California in the spring turned into work opportunities, which led to months of flying back and forth. This was moving forward, wasn't it? Only maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was just moving around, which isn't at all the same thing. Because there I was, post-wedding weekend at a coffee shop somewhere off Highway 101 on my way back to Los Angeles in the surreal position of proving to skeptical strangers on the other end of credit hotlines that I was who I said I was. But I couldn't give them an accurate address. Did I live in California or New York? I couldn't receive the fax forms they needed me to fill out because I had no access to a fax machine. A landline phone number? Sorry, don't have one. I couldn't even tell them where I was going to be next week. And I had unwittingly organized my life so that I was far away from nearly everyone who could remind me of myself.
Which of these can I help you with? Credit cards.
Another epic phone call, this time with a credit union, revealed that not only had the new Laura emptied my checking account, she had also opened at least 7 credit card accounts in my name. After I hung up, a woman at the nearby table gave me a kind smile. I didn't mean to listen in, but my sister-in-law got her identity stolen too, she said. And it all turned out all right? I asked. Not really. It was a nightmare that went on for years. I got back into my car, turned on the radio as high as it would go, and continued toward Los Angeles. I began wondering, how could I not have known this was all happening? What was I going to do to stop it? Just then, I realized I was about to pass the turnoff that leads to the Monterey Peninsula and Big Sur. The first time I had gone to Big Sur, I was 9 years old and on a road trip with my family. As we hit the expanse of Highway 1 between Carmel and Big Sur, that almost impossible stretch of road carved into the divide of steep mountain rock and ocean, I had the strongest visceral reaction I'd had to any place in the world. My father pulled the car over, and as my brother tells it, I started to cry because I was so happy. I tended toward melodrama as a child. But I can remember with great clarity sitting across from my father at a woodsy restaurant in Big Sur that evening and looking past him out the window at the confluence of mountains and ocean with a feeling of amazement and an awareness I had never experienced before. Not unlike falling in love for the first time, such intense feelings can make you feel small in their grasp. Or, if it's a good love, a kind one, you can feel the opposite. Bigger than you are, braver, more certain of yourself. 3 years ago, after I had finished writing my first book, I returned to Big Sur and spent a washed-out January staring out at those cliffs, the highway closed to the south by storm damage, and to the north by fallen rock brutal enough that I didn't venture far that way either. I had a black umbrella and big boots and took long walks each afternoon. The Ventana wilderness, soggy and completely unaccommodating, humbling in the best way. It was a happy time, and while I had gone back there intending to start a new project, what I did instead, other than take walks, was a whole lot of nothing. Nothing had never filled my days so expansively, which is part of the allure of the place, an ease with itself that invites you in a little at a time, eventually reminding you in big and small ways of your own humanity. And now here I was again, about to miss the turn, but this time in serious need of a positive force. A detour, especially this detour, was not the wisest plan. I had police reports to file, paperwork that was due yesterday. The officer's words echoed in my mind. "Kid, this is just the beginning." Still, I took the exit. As I passed Carmel and began winding through those mountainside curves and bridges towards Big Sur Valley, It was late afternoon and turning very windy. I kept the windows open anyway. My first stop was that woodsy restaurant on the cliff's edge where I had eaten with my family 2 decades ago, and where I'd also had Sunday night dinner during that rain-drenched January. I walked inside and took in the familiar mahogany bar and high rafters, and those windows offering uninterrupted views of the ocean and mountains. The restaurant was closed for dinner setup, but the day manager let me go out to the terrace, where I settled in at a table with a mug of coffee and watched the sunset. Henry Miller, who loved Big Sur and made it his home, once said that until we lose ourselves, there is no hope of finding ourselves. I thought about the other Laura walking around in Mexico, spending my money and even speaking to officials at my bank, all in an apparently convincing performance of me. And here I was, the real me, unable to tell in ways that ostensibly mattered, a convincing story about who I was. It made me wonder for a moment if maybe she was actually a better candidate for being me than I was. But sitting on that terrace, the peacefulness that enveloped me when I stepped into the restaurant began changing into a kind of bedrock familiarity, and all at once I felt completely like myself. Not the self who had been tested or the self who was still figuring out where she was going next, but the one beneath all that, the self I had become acutely aware of my first time in Big Sur, the girl who was in awe of the world around her and her place in it. Maybe this is what we get in life. A few great loves. Loves that return us to ourselves when we need it most. And maybe some of those loves aren't people, but places. Real and adopted homes that fill us up with light and energy and hope at moments when we feel especially tired or lost. That is the beauty of love in all its forms. We don't know when or how it's going to save us.
That's Diane Guerrero reading Laura Dave's essay, GPS for My Lost Identity. We'll catch up with Laura after the break. Laura Dave says that the identity thieves used her information to open 13 different credit cards. That made it hard for investigators to keep up with them and allowed them to go on a huge spending spree.
These people bought over $200,000 worth of products. They bought a ton of stuff from Victoria's Secret. They bought so much sporting equipment, so much stereo equipment. There was a lot of food purchased, and then some specific food. There was lots of pizza deliveries, and there were lobster deliveries. This was a long time ago, and I still remember being sort of in awe of a $5,000 purchase at Marshall's. I remember thinking, how can you purchase $5,000 worth of products at Marshall's and not raise any alarms?
They were never caught, and Laura also never learned why she became their target.
The building I had been living in New York, there were a couple of other people that had their identities stolen in that building as well. So I thought, it's someone that has access to the mailboxes. Is it someone that works in the building? Is it someone that works at the post office? But I actually think what happened was, it was 2008. The internet was up and running, so there was enough technology that identity theft was running rampant. But the difference with me was I wasn't around to stop it.
Laura's identity theft turned into a grand larceny case. Her credit was frozen for almost a decade. But she says she hasn't suffered permanent financial damage, and she was recently able to buy her first home in Santa Monica. And Laura says that even though it caused such havoc in her life, she was able to find some good in all the chaos.
When I had to be the one vouching for myself, I realized in a different way what mattered to me. I don't think it's a coincidence that 6 months later, I met my now husband and moved to our home in Los Angeles. And I never did have that sense of feeling so lost again.
It was a gift of fate that when she learned about the identity theft, she was so close to the place that made her feel most like herself.
Big Sur is just truly one of the most magical places in the world. It's one of those places that the longer you spend there, you kind of realize that it has this quiet beauty that is truly healing. I have a friend who said about Big Sur, it is kind of like watching your soul outside of your own body. There's a peacefulness there and a assuredness that really has never been tampered with. There is something about places that, if we're lucky, remind us of all the different people we've been at the different times we've been in that place. And it's nice to have an exit that you get off, and as soon as you are in that town again or walking down that path again, you see all the versions of yourself that another person even never knew.
Laura has a son now, but she hasn't brought him to Big Sur yet. She says she will someday. For now, it's still a place that feels like her own.
It's so drilled into us that there's this person that's going to save us, that there's someone that's going to save us. And what a nice idea that we are going to bring ourselves somewhere that is going to help us save ourselves.
Laura Dave. She's a novelist living in Santa Monica with her husband and son. Her books include 800 Grapes, London is the Best City in America, and The Divorce Party. We've got more after the break. Daniel Jones, editor of the Modern Love column for the New York Times, says that usually one of the rules of the column is that essays need to be about a person rather than a place.
You know, even the best rules are made to be broken, I guess, because in this case it really is a story about a love of place, in this place Big Sur, or at least how a place informs your identity and shapes you and lets you know who you are. I thought Laura did that so powerfully here that it just won me over. She'd sort of lost track of who she was. So to get back in touch with the sort of deepest part of herself, she took a detour to where that part of herself had been most alive.
Thanks again to Diane Guerrero for reading this week's piece. You can see her in Jane the Virgin and Orange is the New Black. Her book is My Family Divided. It's about her parents' deportation to Colombia when she was just 14 and how she was left behind. She's also host of the podcast, How It Is. Next week, Ellie Kemper, who stars in Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt.
Once, I threw a playground ball at the head of a boy who was repeatedly dunking my young son underwater. Before I threw the ball, I shouted at him to stop, but he continued. I was at the other end of the pool, maybe a 6-second swim away, but my 5-year-old son was gasping and pleading, and the fastest way to make my point was to throw the ball. I played college baseball. I have a pretty good arm.
Modern Love is a production of the New York Times and WBUR, Boston's NPR station. It's produced, directed, and edited by Jessica Alpert, Caitlin O'Keefe, John Perotti, and Amory Sievertson. Sound design and original scoring by Matt Reed. Our intern is Louisa Judge. The idea for the Modern Love podcast was conceived by Lisa Tobin. Iris Adler is our executive producer. Daniel Jones is the editor of Modern Love for the New York Times and advisor to the show. Music for the podcast, courtesy of APM. I'm Meghna Chakrabarty. See you next week.